Good morning and welcome everyone to Turbocharge Tomorrow. We're going to give folks about another 20 to 30 seconds to arrive into the audience and then we'll get going. How are you today, Marshall?
I am doing fantastic, Dan. How about yourself?
Awesome. Great day in Chicago.
Minus the cicadas.
Minus the cicadas. They seem to have left us city folks alone. I heard in the suburbs it's a different story.
I have a locust out my window right now, so.
That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I see people arriving. Welcome to Turbocharge Tomorrow, and let's dive in. So, Marshall, we're going to talk a lot today about the technologies of today and tomorrow. But before we do, I want to take us back to 1974. There's a social psychologist by the name of Herbert Freudenberger, and for the first time, he introduces the term into popular culture, employee burnout. So that's 1974. Then fast forward a decade, we introduced the personal computer that further kind of chains us to our desks, for lack of a better term. I'm not going to even try and talk about all the innovations and advancements, from the 80s until now. We're fresh off COVID. I recently just read an article about the loneliness epidemic in the Wall Street Journal. And I feel like so many of the headlines around hyperautomation and RPA and generative AI are about taking jobs. But what I really want to do today with you is talk about how it's changing the worker experience for the better. I know personally, virtually every hour I'm leveraging one of these tools now, and they're getting so good that they're leaving me dumbfounded when it really does change the trajectory of my day. So I couldn't be more excited to welcome you, and I couldn't be more excited to welcome everyone to the third episode of Turbocharge Tomorrow, brought to you by Distillery. My name is Dan Patak. I'm your host. Marshall, I'd love for you to introduce yourself, and then we'll dive right in.
What a way to start, Dan. I like some of those stats and comments. So nice to meet everybody. My name is Marshall Sied. I'm the co-founder, co-CEO of a service provider named Ashling Partners, and we're right kind of in the core center of what Dan is talking about in regards to hyperautomation, automation, RPA, generative AI. So we've been at it for 7 years at this point. I like to say I'm a recovering ERP consultant. So I used to implement big monolithic systems that were packaged kind of off the shelf, kind of the names like Oracle, Microsoft, Salesforce, and always trying to find process improvement and business outcomes for organizations we work with that manifest themselves through those implementations. But launched Ashling with the idea that there's probably a more modern, better way to process automation, a quicker speed to value, if you will. And this little thing called AI has really kind of turbocharged, if you will, the whole service line that we represent. So happy to be here. Looking forward to a spirited conversation.
Awesome. Amazing. All right. Let's dive right in. We've got about 25 minutes here. It's a lot to cover. First things first, terms. We've got hyperautomation. We've got RPA. We've got generative AI. I don't even think Forrester and Gartner can agree on some of these terms. So you probably know this stuff and this technology as well as anyone. Can you give us your perspective on some of these terms and just kind of level set for the audience before we dive into some specific topics?
Yeah, you're right, Dan. The industry cannot agree on nomenclature at this point. I think it's because it's still an emergent technology class. So whenever you're in the early innings of a technology category, everybody's trying to create the definition, if you will. And I think this is not different than that. In order to give you some terms, I think it's important to understand kind of where some of this technology grew up. So you referenced 1974, so I'm going to take you back to the 70s too, when Lean Six Sigma kicked in. And that was really the precipice of a lot of what we do, because you're standardizing and optimizing the actual business process itself through Lean and Six Sigma approaches to get the best process so that potentially you could automate it in future years. Then packaged applications like ERP systems started coming into place. And, when that happened, everybody was so focused on the technology, they might have lost sight of the people. So your point on employee burnout a little bit. So then Agile and, DevOps, all of that started to come into fruition in kind of what I would call the mobile and custom development era of the 2010s. And so all of that is built on top of each other. Automation is not new. We've always been able to use VB scripts, macros, use workflow in a SAP system as an example. I think what's different right now is that all of this has come together So you mentioned RPA. That is more task automation. It's like a building block to process automation. And it's all accretive, right? So if you add document processing, what's called intelligent document processing, and workflow approval to RPA, you can automate a full process. When you start to think about experience, by layering in low-code solutions like Microsoft Power Apps or custom solutions that probably a lot of the audience is focused on, you can start to give a great experience that gets closer to the customer end-to-end from a process automation perspective. When you start to layer in generative AI, you can actually start to automate some decisioning processing. So not just rule-driven processing. So, net, they're all building blocks. We use intelligent automation and hyperautomation pretty interchangeably around Ashling and with our client base. The difference for me between hyperautomation and intelligent automation is governance. So there's a mindset, there's a governance, there's kind of the soft aspect of large scale programs when you start talking hyperautomation. But RPA, just to kind of summarize, more rule driven automation. End-to-end process automation is where you start to bring natural language solutions, chatbot solutions, low-code solutions into the foray. And hyperautomation is where you start to kind of think about this more programmatically. Governance, data policy, AI policy, it all kind of culminates with hyperautomation from my perspective.
Awesome. Thank you. That's very helpful. So for the sake of our call, knowing that there's some overlap, some synonymous terms, I'm going to use hyperautomation.
Sure.
And you can kind of correct me. So let's dive into results. I want to focus on two things. We started this chat by talking about kind of employee satisfaction. At the end of the day, there's the human element, and I don't want that to get lost in all this technology talk. All of this is, for us as leaders and for us as workers to hopefully improve upon our day-to-day, to reduce the lower level tasks so we can focus on creativity, intelligence, strategy. So can you paint a picture for me of a case study or an outcome from either an employee satisfaction or an employee productivity, and then a business outcomes perspective recently that you implemented with hyperautomation?
Yeah, it's a great conversation, Dan, and I'm gonna preface what I'm about to give you as examples with the idea that I think our industry has a ways to go still in regards to thinking about what I would call value levers, because especially when you have like high interest rates and the macro backdrop we have in the economy right now, people are going to look at cost optimization and efficiencies first and foremost, so that they can fund what they would call, and I would disagree with this, but what they would call more soft value levers like employee experience. You have to look at it holistically, to your point. So I just want to kind of put that safe harbor out there that I think we have a ways to go. But I think at the end of the day, there's a saying kind of in our kind of niche industry, it's about taking the robot out of the human, right? It's not about putting the human with the robot. There's not enough hours in the day. There's plenty of work to do. I mean, we could, not in my lifetime will I see everything that can be automated actually automated. I know that for a fact. And so when I look at kind of meaningful use cases, I think about areas of impact where you're displacing activities that are non-value add to a business. So, data entry, swivel chair data entry between systems, whether you're using APIs or RPA or whatever, that should be done in the digital era. And frankly, the workforce, the youth coming into the workforce doesn't want to be doing that work anyways, right? We're going to have a shortage of that. So that is, an area we certainly focus on in some of these programs. We worked with a very large medical distribution company, and when you're a growing company, it's about how do I actually keep doing what we're doing with the same amount of people and free them up to go do some additional, more strategic areas. The area I always call out that we've had at a lot of clients is, vendor management and procurement. Everybody says that they want to focus on strategic vendor management and getting more creative with their suppliers and vendors that help their businesses run and thrive.
Yeah.
But they spend 99% of their time chasing down for certifications, tax documents, compliance documents, and it's necessary to be in business, but it doesn't differentiate their business. So to me, it's all about kind of throwing kerosene on the differentiation fire. Like, how do I actually focus on what differentiates my business while trying to automate, core operations that we need to have to be in business, but aren't necessarily going to make us the leader in our market.
Yeah. At Distillery, our audience is primarily on the technical side, software development leaders. I'm curious in that instance, where are you seeing more initiation on these processes? I don't think you're going to get any pushback today, almost anywhere throughout the enterprise, on firms saying they should be doing and they want to be doing more of this. And that procurement, is that on the business side of the house? Is that on the procurement team? Is that on the technology team to initiate some of those conversations? What do you think?
Yes to all of the above. I think what's happening is these cycles are getting faster as modern technology has gotten faster, Dan, and it's gotten more capable. So, what that means is, if you're a developer, if you're a software engineer, and you see an inefficiency and you have an idea, you should probably take that to a process me. But you also need to make sure. I mean, some processes are, have to be auditable. As an example, there's compliance aspects to certain processes. There's SOX compliance if you're kind of in the F&A realm. Certain industries have a lot of FDA approved processes that you have to think through. So you need your process.
Yeah.
But to me, this is like the culmination of what we've always tried to do, which is force IT leaders and software engineers to be more business centric, and to force business SMEs to understand workflow and the complexity of deploying a technology solution in a little more of an in-depth way.
Yeah. And almost to your point, maybe it's less than a domain. And what I always say, and it's maybe a little cheesy or cheeky, but it is that courageous executive, right? And it is that mindset, because let's be honest, some of these programs have a decent failure rate. You can correct me on this, but I've read anywhere between 20 and 40%. And so there is some risk there. And as a courageous executive, you have to kind of put yourself out there to say, we want to improve this, and something may go wrong in the process, right?
Oh, no question. I mean, I think any enterprise program has a high failure rate, and it usually begins with an executive willing to raise their hand and say, hey, I believe in the vision. I'm willing to put my name on this, because from there, funding happens. And then from there, activity happens and strategies and work streams happen, right?
Yeah.
So, I think that is number one. I think that's actually what we see in broader programs in general, even predating my time in this hyperautomation space. I mean, executive sponsorship, without it was going to fail. I also think increasingly just upskilling. I look at everything that's coming out with generative AI every single hour. It's not even every single day anymore. And we need to be able to weed through the BS a lot faster, because there's a lot. I mean, everybody's got a co-pilot now, right? It's like table stakes. You got to have a co-pilot in your product. But the reality is, because everybody has to have it, you're not gonna differentiate. So I think you need to be able to avoid some of the pitfalls, executive sponsorship, thinking about the funding model. But at the end of the day, it's also about supportability, not creating debt for the organization too.
Yeah.
Which I think is that's an area a lot of people don't think about in their original business cases.
So let's dive into that kind of legacy systems or debt. How are, and what I consistently see is, the larger the enterprise, the more debt they have naturally.
Oh, yeah.
How are you seeing with that? If someone's coming to you and initiating a new hyperautomation project, how are you either working around that or working through that element?
Yeah, and it's going to be a little generalized here, but I think you need to have a holistic decision framework that has a holistic reference architecture, just to get more on the tech side. So you can't just focus on the LLM layer. You can't just focus on the data layer. You can't just focus on the infrastructure layer underneath all that. You can't just focus on the automation or the app layer. You got to look at it all now, because I don't see any enterprise at this point that we work with. We mainly work with pretty big companies, kind of G2000 type companies. They all have probably too much technology sitting on a shelf. What they really need help is rationalizing it and bringing it together in an orchestrated fashion to actually achieve a business outcome that doesn't create downstream debt. And so if you have a decision framework on, hey, if it's repetitive and it's high volume, and we want to do it the same way every single time, then I use an RPA solution. Or if it's interfacing with my client, so I need a high UX, a high element of design, I'm going to use a low code app. or a certain type of custom programming language. That is important. And then from there, you have your reference architectures based on what lane you go, right?
Yeah. How common are those? Are you seeing, or is that still kind of an emerging kind of frontier, that overarching kind of framework?
It's interesting. I think they're more common as the hyperscalers, have become more common over the last 5 to 10 years at enterprises. So your AWSs and your Microsofts. I think the challenge is, we're kind of in an era of convergence, right? And I'm seeing it like specifically in my space where there's big players in our space that started mainly as RPA partners like UiPath or a Blue Prism, and they've added capabilities that enterprise app companies have had. And then the other classes, you've had the Microsofts, the Salesforces, the ServiceNows, the SAPs of the world. They're adding, pure breed, what I would call pure breed hyperautomation capabilities. So it's hard to kind of go through the marketing smokescreen a little bit here. So I think it's really critical that you have a kind of pre-approved architecture that you will kind of default to, Dan.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's an easy time, I think is the point. I think the Microsofts of the world are kind of, really coming at this space hard. Everything from Copilot to Power Platform. And just general customized data and AI and their actual AI services with OpenAI. So you really need to stay disciplined is really the point. And you're going to have to do a lot of rapid prototyping.
It's tough, to your point on the speed at which this is all merging. I know on Twitter, I'm seeing those threads that are 40 tweets deep on all the new use cases for every time, a new OpenAI model gets rolled out. And it's just the speed at which they're being rolled out and then the power in which they're being created is challenging, I think, for any of us.
Yeah, I actually try to stay off Twitter. We're both aging ourselves. We're calling it Twitter.
Sorry, I apologize. Yes, I probably always will.
I'm with you. It's almost impossible, though. It really is. It's like everybody's coming at it. And I think what we have seen in the enterprise is kind of a wait-and-see approach more so, actually.
Yeah.
From a pure AI perspective. Everybody's trying to get their house in order from a data, a privacy, a governance, a policy perspective before they, really try to figure out what this means to them. But to me, it's an evolution discussion. Like you're adding additional we can automate things we couldn't automate before because now we can go beyond process and task. We can enrich decisions and automate, human in the loop type workflows to the next level. So you're just opening up a whole world of possibilities. And outside of that, it's like there's going to be great products developed. There's going to be a lot of companies that fold in that era, right?
Let's double click into data. You mentioned data, the data strategy and governance required to do hyperautomation and RPA really well. I think if you talk to virtually any software development leader, they're going to tell you they're continuing to struggle. The second that you feel like you get your arms around your data strategy, you're introducing new applications, new processes like hyperautomation that is producing more data. And so it is this kind of chase your tail type mentality. How are you tackling and working with folks on developing a data governance strategy and architecture that hopefully tries to not keep them ahead, but keep them up with the progress of their enterprise?
Yeah, one of the number one requests of 2024 for us at least is how do we actually ensure that we have the right data governance, data strategy, so that we can do the more complicated automation solutions. So if it's a simple task automation, you're really just moving data, right? You're almost in some areas you're replicating an API, but increasingly you don't just see simple task automations anymore. So, one way you do that is you look at lakehouses, right? There's a reason why you hear a lot about Databricks and Microsoft Fabric, which is kind of new from the Microsoft world, and the Snowflakes. It's because everybody's realizing that they gotta be prepared with the high volume, the different variety. So streaming data, voice analytics, not just structured data, and the velocity of that data, especially if you're bringing in streaming data. So, that's what else is supposed to do well. I think the challenge I have seen is that we have a lot of data hoarders that don't actually know if they're ever going to use that data. And they're like, hey, it's getting cheaper. Compute power is getting cheaper. Storage is getting cheaper. I'm just going to store it anyways. I got to think in the future, some people are going to regret just hoarding data for the sake of it because it's going to be harder to truly use generative AI. But it's increasingly important. It's always been important in automation.
Yeah.
If you automate a bad process that has bad data, you get the bad quicker. That's
Yeah. And we're seeing that exponentially with LLMs. I think both at the, the commercial and the public level. And then as we start to implement those behind the firewall at the enterprise level, you're getting bad answers and wrong answers, and LLMs pulling in data from the onion. I just saw that the other day, advising folks to eat rocks, at least one a day.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's the difference between consumer tech and enterprise grade tech, right, Dan? And I think we have to cross that chasm. In the near term, the chasm will be crossed by using techniques like RAG for citations and to ensure that you can validate and at least minimize hallucination. But there'll be something else that comes out that allows this to be even more robust and enterprise grade.
Yeah.
I think that's the challenge you always have when you're like looking at pundits on social media. It's like they're talking a lot about consumer tech where the price of poker, if you will, is a lot lower. When you go to the enterprise, there's a whole different class of considerations and risks that you have to mitigate.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk about application strategy because that lives right alongside data governance strategy. Certainly always, and we were talking in the last episode a lot about app migration strategies. So as software development leaders, we are managing the portfolio of applications, trying to determine not only our cloud migration strategies, so which apps are going to be retired, migrated, but also those new decisions that continue to come up every quarter, the buy versus the build. And now you not only have to take the application strategy and the portfolio strategy into play, but you got to kind of think one step ahead as far as the RPA, the automation, the hyperautomation, the data, and the API strategy, and how all these applications are going to talk to one another. So how do you think about, or how do you advise or work with your software development leaders on the kind of the new thinking around application management?
Yeah, I think one way we already hit on, it's a concept called pace layering. If it's something that's core to your operations, but it's been proven time and time again that you need to have it to be in business, but it's not going to differentiate your business, your experience to your stakeholders, your employees, your customer base, your supplier base. And there's something off the shelf that's easy, use that, right? I think increasingly though, to me, I know what our developers and software engineers have looked at is, things like GitHub Copilot, right? To speed up the development lifecycle time. It doesn't mean in the enterprise setting that you're actually speeding up the duration because you still have other people that you're dependent on for testing, UAT, migration. But to me, what this new class of kind of coding assistance, kind of a subset of generative AI is doing, it's kind of bringing back to the custom app world again. Right?
Yeah.
I grew up in that world too. And it's never left, by the way. Digital product engineering has never left. But
for sure, to
me, things that you might have tried to make fit in a more configurable, customized kind of way in a packaged application, let's say it's a CRM application, you can now do it you can do it pretty quickly in a more tailored approach, a bespoke approach for your organization in a custom way. So, this whole class of low code, which that's where RPA platforms grew up. That's where other low code applications grew up. It's kind of bringing it back again. It's making it a little more feasible and viable from a business case perspective to do so.
Yeah, I think we're going to continue to see that mix. And to your point, how often do we say we bought and we built, and it would have been easier just to custom build from the start? But to your point, the generative AIs and the LLM, today, the progression of those, I think, is going to have all of us continuing to rethink custom software developments, the speed at which we're able to do that, and the benefits. Really, when you think in terms of just like the hyperautomation perspective and having all these applications come together to achieve that end, right?
Yeah, no question. I mean, it's an exciting time to be a software engineer. Like I don't subscribe to all of this. It used to be computer science used to be the way. Now it's not. I don't subscribe to any of that at this point. If anything, it's going to elevate the game where we have to have more of an architecture mindset, not just a coding mindset, right?
Absolutely. All right, we got time for about two more, Marshall. This has been fantastic. You were talking a little bit earlier about moving applications from kind of the pilot stage or the concept stage into production ready. We were just talking about the risks within the enterprise. Can you talk us through maybe some of the pitfalls that you see in making that transition or that migration?
Yeah, I think specific to the AI world, there is a model that a lot of people that are probably listening are familiar with called MLOps. I think when you go production, you have to think about a continuous improvement mindset. You know, your algorithms are only going to get smarter if you feed it more of the right targeted data. I think a lot of organizations stop short. They think that the work is done once they migrate a solution to production, a pilot success into a mass scaled success. And it's because they shortchanged kind of the ML ops component of it. They thought they built the model and they trained the model on day one. Your job's never done. I can assure you Amazon's not stopping on their algorithms, right? So I think that's a big key, is that you have to view anything in this hyper automation space as a continuous improvement solution and framework. If you're not retiring certain automations, if you're not enhancing in kind of a CI/CD approach certain automation work streams, you're kind of missing the point of the solution.
Yeah.
You're not going to accrue the value, and you're not going to add the value you want with your existing investments.
Yeah, it's great. There's always obviously the tension of resource constraints. And when you do push something live, there's the backlog that's been sitting there. So it's easy to want to move on. And what I'm hearing you say is you have to wrestle with that. And even if, it's a reduction of resources, there's massive value in that continuous and ongoing improvement.
Yeah, you're not just putting an SAP accounting package into run state, right? Like you got to continuously modify this, but you should see value if you have the right framework and governance structure.
And even at the onset of the project, when you are developing resources or applying resources to that, taking that into consideration, right?
Absolutely.
All right. Last two. AI decision making. I want you to touch a little bit upon that. That is a term, that is a concept, maybe how that differs from what we talked about today or does not differ.
I mean, I think it's a part of the pie here that we've already talked about, Dan. When we talk about AI decision making, I think we're referring to how do you actually tangibilize the success of an AI based solution. And once again, I think we have a ways to go in the industry. Like I can tell you when it's a process automation, I can tell you how many times it's going to run, what the value of every cycle time is going to be to a organization. So that's extremely tangible. That's why solutions like RPA took off so much in 2018 to 2020-ish timeframe, because it was so visible and so easy to track. All these co-pilots out there now, they claim 10 to 40% productivity per person. A CFO is not going to be okay with that. They're going to well, which one is it? And I'm not sure. And so I think we have a ways to go in regards to making decisions on where AI is applicable and relevant, and where there's other solutions in our tool belt that are actually a better fit, which is going to happen. It's not like everything's going to be AI.
100%. All right, Marshall, I so very much appreciate your time. We covered a ton of grounds. It's called Turbocharge Tomorrow, so I'm going to get you out of here on this. If you could recommend one strategy, one process, one technology for our audience to pull forward to today, tomorrow, that they feel like they're going to see some of the greatest benefits as we head into the summer in Q3, what would that one thing be?
So, Dan, I can't give you just one technology. That is impossible. I'll leave you with this. There's a category within hyperautomation that I am personally still very surprised hasn't taken off even faster, and that's process mining. So, one of the biggest challenges with big companies is not can we automate, but what should we automate, and where should we deploy AI models, human in the loop workflow that have AI, natural language understanding, RPA, all this stuff. Process mining is really that real world, that real time kind of x-ray of a process, pulling logs from systems. So it's like the empirical data driven, as opposed to going around and asking Dan, hey, what do you do in your sales and marketing process? We're actually just going to your CRM system, and we're able to kind of see that in real time. And you can see the bottlenecks, areas you can improve process just through, Lean Six Sigma techniques, areas where you can deploy RPA, areas where AI might be better because it's more of a predictive kind of decisioning discussion. So that is a category that Ashling went all in on pretty early, and we're still thinking that we're only scratching the surface on the capability of that particular technology stack. But of course, Gen AI and broader automation, I mean, that's core to what we do. Just trying to throw something new for you.
I think you did pretty well there. Process mining. I love it. Absolutely. Marshall, this has been fascinating. This has been fantastic. We so very much appreciate your time and perspectives. Thanks for joining us on Turbocharge Tomorrow. To our audience, thanks for joining us today. We'll have another episode coming up shortly. So appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Dan. It was fun.
Awesome.